Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our sort of webinar interview today, breaking down barriers to exercise. So this is part of Women's Health Week and on our final day. Today, your presenter will be Janine Watson, and I'll be your facilitator. My name's Peter Butler. So MS Plus acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We also acknowledge our gratitude that we share this land today, our sorrow for the cost of that sharing, and our hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice and partnership. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I will now like to introduce you to Janine, who will be speaking today. You can see on your screen. I'll actually cross over to Janine. Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Janine, and I'll just get you to introduce yourself if that's okay.
Hi, thanks, Peter. I'm Janine Watson. I am a member of the Australian Paralympic team and competed at the Tokyo 2020 Games in the sport of Para-Taekwondo, where I was successful in winning Australia's first ever medal, bronze medal in the sport of Para-Taekwondo. I was diagnosed with MS at the age of 25, and I was the only person in the world with MS who was competing in the sport of Para-Taekwondo at the Tokyo Games for Para-Taekwondo.
Well, okay, so you were diagnosed at around the age of 25. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your life was like at that time?
Age of 25, I was a high school health and physical education teacher out in a small little country town in southwest Queensland, and just starting a career, starting a life, and very, very sporty, very, very active. When you're in a small country community, all you do is work and go and play sport. That's what I was doing. And then suddenly I started not being able to see. I'd get blurry vision, double vision, and then I'd lose my sight completely. And it took about 6 months before we were able actually to work out that it was multiple sclerosis that I had.
And so how did the diagnosis change your approach to sport and exercise?
After being diagnosed, I was told to go home and make myself comfortable, not to do any exercise at all, mainly because any increase in body temperature, being very heat intolerant, meant that I would lose my sight. I was also losing feeling in arms and legs, and was told not to do anything. So that was bad for me. So don't go outside, don't exercise, just basically go home and wait to die. So for me, being a HPE teacher, that meant that my career was over. It meant that everything that I did outside of work was over, and it was just mentally just absolutely devastating for me. So I went into a real rut. Then also being on heavy steroids and methylprednisone, and that process of starting to go through your treatment, I ended up ballooning up to about 115 kilos. So heavily overweight, not doing anything that I loved. So ended up mental health was not very good at all in those initial couple of years.
And yeah, and it's I think we're all very happy that the way doctors approach MS nowadays is a little bit differently, and they do promote exercise and movement, because that is important for everyone. And you know, it's something that I've spoken to a lot of people about, that a little while back, that exercise wasn't promoted. You were told to go and lie down and not move. So I'm glad we've come this far, and you know, and for everyone, exercise is absolutely critical. So you know, after you were diagnosed, did you have to sort of change up what exercise you did? You know, before you were very sporty. Did you move to different types of exercise and sport?
Yeah. So even though the neurologist told me to go home and make myself comfortable, as stubborn as I was, I didn't really listen to them. I didn't go home and make myself comfortable. I was playing squash and tennis, and I was a goalkeeper for soccer. I really had to give up those sports just because my vision wasn't quite right. Still the double vision and the blurry vision. It meant that I couldn't see the ball anymore. So I ended up starting adult gymnastics. So it was going from outdoor sports to more low impact indoor sports, which were done at night time. And it was just about getting movement back rather than competition. Once I actually changed neurologists, and that neurologist said, go do exercise, you're fine, you're absolutely fine. Yes, you're going to get the pins and needles in your arms and legs, they're going to go numb, but it's not going to cause lesions on the brain. Don't be scared that that's what's happening. You're not going to deteriorate because you're out exercising. Go and do what you love. So I then took up the sport of Taekwondo, never did any martial arts whatsoever, and decided I'll give it a go, and absolutely fell in love with the sport.
And yeah, I guess so. Obviously, you took up Taekwondo, and did you have sort of an opportunity after your diagnosis to compete on the national and world stage in Taekwondo?
Yeah, so within 6 months of taking up Taekwondo, I competed at my first Australian Championships and won my first Australian title. There was no place for me in a para sense, so I was still competing against able-bodied athletes, and all the way up until 2015, I was still competing internationally against able-bodied athletes. So I had my impairments, but was still competing against the best of the best within the world. It's just that I had a few more challenges than other people. Some athletes thought that I had some advantages to them because I don't have feelings in my arms or legs. They felt that it was a benefit for me because you're getting kicked in the arms and legs, and because I couldn't feel it, they thought that it was a benefit for me because I'd keep going, whereas they felt the pain, whereas I didn't, which I thought was quite funny for that. But in 2015, the World Taekwondo Federation then decided that it was too unsafe for someone with neurological impairments to be competing against able-bodied athletes. So I was then able to transition into the para Taekwondo side of things.
Well, I mean, it is a little bit funny that people thought you had an advantage. And I guess that's what it's like sometimes living with MS, is the invisibility of the disease. People actually don't know, what you're going through, and an amazing achievement. So, but can you just speak a little bit more about your experiences representing Australia in the Paralympics?
Yep. So I qualified for Tokyo in February of 2020. 2 weeks before basically the world shut down with the pandemic. And then it was a case of trying to figure out whether or not the games were still going to go ahead. Then we got the announcement that the games were going to be postponed, and we were all in lockdown. For me, that meant that I was training for a games which I didn't know was going to go ahead or not. But also, I'm in a sport where it's close contact. I'm fighting somebody, but you're having to social distance. It meant that my training was completely by myself or only with my coach. So then you add on the fact that I'm also immunocompromised because of the medication that we're on for the MS, meant that it added that added complexity into the training. But but to know that the games were going to go ahead was absolutely fantastic. My coach, Ben Hartman, he lives on the Gold Coast. I live in Brisbane, so we would travel back and forth each week. I'd go down to the Gold Coast, he'd come up to Brisbane. He ended up being my training partner as well as my coach, so he got kicked 3 times a week, whereas generally it's other people get a turn every week. For a whole year it was just him, so I think he's still paying off the physio bills from all the kicks that he got from me. In the lead up to the games, we were put in a quarantine bubble just to ensure that we could actually get to the games, and I competed on the very last day, so we were fly in, fly out. So 5 days before I competed, we flew into the village. Again, we were isolated in the village. We were just in our building and that was it. We weren't allowed in the dining hall. We weren't allowed to speak to any other athletes from any other countries. And very, very isolated. It was just my coach and I, but we made sure that our whole focus was to get to that competition. On the day, I had 4 fights. I lost my very first fight by 1 kick, which meant that I then went into what was called the repechage round, which meant that I couldn't get a gold or a silver, but I could get a bronze. I had a 6-hour wait from my first fight to my second fight. So in that 6 hours times, a lot of things go rushing through your head of, I've just lost that fight, what am I going to do? But for me, it was a case of, I just want to have fun. So I had little clip-on koalas and I had little kangaroos, and I'd go and see the Japanese volunteers and I'd practice my Japanese with them. I'd listen to music and I just tried to soak up what experience there was. There was no crowds, there was no stadiums. There was probably about 20 people, but I tried to have as much fun as I could. And every fight from then on, for me, it was about having fun. And that's what I did. And my bronze medal match, I ended up winning 63-0. And I think there were about 4 people in the stadium who watched it. And no one at all watched it because there were no TV rights for para taekwondo. So I haven't even seen footage of myself. There's no footage of me actually winning that match. There's little snippets, but that's it. And then the very next day, we flew back to Sydney and had 2 weeks of hotel quarantine. And then from Sydney back to Brisbane, where we had another week of home quarantine. So it very, very isolating, but never got COVID whatsoever in that time. But in the last 2 months, I've gotten COVID twice at home.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like an interesting sort of journey, and it's great that you made the most out of it. You know, learning Japanese and you know, there might not be footage, but you do have a bronze medal, so you know that's always a great reminder, I imagine.
Yeah.
So just onto some barriers now. So obviously you face a few barriers when you're training and competing. Can you just maybe describe some of the ways that you manage your symptoms and continue with your physical training?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me with my MS is my heat intolerance. And for me, any increase in body temperature results in paralysis in the arms and legs and also loss of vision. I also get a lot of confusion, so that cognitive confusion, and massive fatigue as well. Coordination goes out the window. So one of the things that we wanted to work on at the Queensland Academy of Sport, where I train, is how can we have me compete and train at the best without overheating. So we wanted to be able to train for as long as possible and have the best quality of training without my MS symptoms flaring up as much. When we first started out, I could train for 15 minutes and that was it. Being an athlete at the Queensland Academy of Sport was absolutely fantastic because I had access to all their sports scientists, and it ended up being almost experiment. So my sports scientist, Luke McDonald, he said to me one day, I want to put you in a 90-degree sauna. And I'm just sort of like, hang on, remember I'm heat intolerant. You know what happens to me when I get hot? And he's like, just trust me. So what we did was what was called heat acclimatization. And it's what a lot of athletes do. It's also what the military does. And what it does is it acclimatizes your body or gets your body comfortable with being in a hot situation. And the way I explain it is the same as if your skin gets a tan. So if you were to go out in the sun and your skin had never ever seen sunlight before, as soon as you go out into the sun, it would burn straight away. But if you expose your skin to just a little bit of sun, just a little bit each time in a small bits each day, really controlled, then you end up getting that tan and you get that protection so you don't burn as much. And that's what happened with the heat acclimatization. So we did a period of 2 weeks in the sauna. So we started off at 90 degrees in the sauna and we started off at 15 minutes for the first session, all the way through to half an hour. And it was always done under complete medical supervision. And the idea of the sauna was not to like lose weight or anything like that. I'm in there, I'm drinking water the whole time. I've got ice water. It's about just getting my body used to that heat. Now, the science behind it is what happens is your body actually starts to develop more blood plasma. So you get more blood volume. More blood pumping around the body means that you actually start to cool the body down. Your core body temperature starts to drop. The other thing that happens is your sweat rate increases. So we found out that I didn't sweat initially when I went into the sauna because my sports scientist, he said, if I'm putting you in the sauna, I'm going to get into the sauna as well. So he went into the sauna with me. And what I noticed was within a couple of minutes, he started sweating. It would just be like dripping off him. I'd be dry. So it wasn't until about 15 minutes that I'd actually start to sweat. So what we find is a lot of people with MS have a reduced sweat rate. They don't actually start to sweat. And what that means is their body heats up. The heat acclimatization, I actually started to sweat a lot earlier. And I started to sweat more, which meant that I was able to cool down a lot more. So when we did these tests, so they then, to actually test out how much this had actually worked, is they devised a Taekwondo related stress test. It's think of like the beep test, but fighting related. So they would have me go until I couldn't go anymore. And what we found is before and after doing the heat acclimatization, my core body temperature actually dropped and I was actually able to hold off my MS symptoms for up to 10 minutes. So pre-heat acclimatization, I could only go for 18 rounds, but post I could go 28 rounds. So in terms of, for me, for that performance, I was able to maintain that high performance level for a lot longer. It was absolutely fantastic because that heat acclimatization lasted for 3 months afterwards. I got to Tokyo and it did not feel hot at all. Everyone else is like, oh, it feels so hot. And I'm like, this is sweet, this is fantastic. It lasted that when I then came back and played the summer series for wheelchair tennis down in Melbourne in January, I just did a couple of sauna sessions, some top-up sessions, and I was fine in 40-degree Melbourne heat playing wheelchair tennis. So having that exposure to heat, actually your body gets a tolerance for it, and your body can actually cool down a lot more efficiently.
Oh, that's yeah, that's amazing. That's super interesting because, you know, I think you sort of the first reaction to heat would be, you know, try and cool down, which is the obvious thing to do. But it's really interesting to hear that over time, if you do acclimatise, that can really benefit you. So I just wanted to sort of ask about sort of your approach to training sessions, and you know, compared to when prior to your diagnosis, how after your diagnosis, how do you approach training sessions, and how do you approach them in when you're considering, you know, fatigue as a factor or heat intolerance? How do you sort of approach those with those symptoms in mind?
I'd say just post-diagnosis, I wanted to do what everyone else did. I didn't want to look different. I wanted to keep up with everybody. I didn't want to look like I was lazy or anything like that. Now I have a completely different approach. Everything now is factored into recovery. So my training at the moment, I do 11 sessions in 5 days. From those 11 active sessions, I have 22 recovery sessions. So I actually have that inbuilt into my training schedule. So for every hour of activity I have in my training schedule is 2 hours of recovery. So that's actually blocked into my training. And we say the difference between a professional athlete and an amateur athlete is a professional athlete knows how important recovery is. And particularly if you've got MS as well, that recovery is even more important. So if I've done a 1 hour training session, I know that I've got to do 2 hours of recovery and rest and factor that in. That's the most important thing, to be able to then go the next day. For me, I train when my body feels the best, and that's around about 9 a.m. in the morning. I can't do 6 a.m. in the morning. I've tried 6 a.m. I'm not a morning person. Can't do in the evenings either. So around about that 9 to 12 time is my best time. So, and that's when I get my best training in, and it's about the quality of training, not the quantity. And it changes. So for me, I have technical training sessions, I have strength and conditioning sessions, and I have functional training sessions. So I have some training sessions which are purely just to keep my body functional. So it's on balance, it's on proprioception, it's on neural pathways. So at the moment, I'm doing a Pilates class, which is based on the Franklin method at Basie Pilates at Albany Creek. And we spent a whole session on just being able to sit and stand correctly and feeling your body and what it's doing and how the muscles are engaging, what nerves are being used and the functionality of it. In my strength and conditioning sessions, I work on my balance. So my warm-up, I will focus just on a balance exercise. So it's not just about the competitive side, it's about I'm also training so that I can walk down the street. So all of these play into account. In my strength and conditioning, when I'm at the gym, most people think you have to do 3 sets of 10. I do, at the moment, I'm doing 4 sets of 4, or for some 3 sets of 5. The reason why is you have that neural fatigue, which is all or nothing. So it's better to get 5 reps of quality exercise out than trying to do just your standard 3 sets of 10. So And then I use little things. So I've got at the gym, so these are my little hooks. So I put these around my wrist and then they hook on. So I struggle even to grip onto a pen. So if you think that you're holding a 10-kilo dumbbell, so these hook in and means that I can then not have to worry about the grip strength in my hand, and then I can safely lift the weights to what I need to.
Awesome. Yeah, some really good strategies that I think anyone with MS could really utilize. And yeah, the grip strength is, that is a common problem. So, and just quite a simple solution as well. And speaking, before we were speaking about heat intolerance, and I was just curious about what cooling techniques you use, and are there any sort of techniques that are used that Paralympic athletes use, or are there just techniques that the everyday person can use as well?
Yep. So I have a little bag of tricks of cooling. So I do both before any events. I do pre-cooling and post-cooling. So not just people with MS, but every single person on the Olympic and the Paralympic team will have slushies. So not having cold water or ice water, actually having a slushie. So having those slushies and the coolness coming down through, that actually cools you. So as a pre-cooler before a game or an event or anything like that, the athletes will actually have a slushie. I find the slushies a little bit too sweet for me. So I actually make my own. So I have just a little USB slushie maker from that. So I just put water in it and then just a little tiny bit of juice just to get that little bit of sweetness, make my own slushie, and just having that coolness coming through. So that actually works a lot better than having cold water or water. And then as a post-cooling, you have your slushies as well. Now, the secret that we've also found with the slushie, for me to stay cool and my MS symptoms not to come on as quickly, I have to perceive, it's the perception of being cold. So I give myself a brain freeze. So that slushie I'll put on the top of my roof, the roof of my mouth, and I'll purposely give myself a brain freeze, and that tells my brain it's cold. So at Tokyo, between every round of my fights, because we had 3 rounds and we only had a minute between each round, you don't want to be having lots of slushy in your gut because you're getting kicked in the stomach. So what would happen is I'd come off after a round, I'd get a teaspoon and put the slushy and just put it on the roof of my mouth, and I'd give myself a brain freeze, and my brain would go, oh, I'm cool, because I knew my core body temperature wasn't increasing. So the brain, I'd actually trick my brain and say, it's cool, and then I'd go back on and I wouldn't have my MS symptoms. Another way that you can trick your brain is just by having menthol. So like Fisherman's Friends or eucalyptus or anything like that actually tricks the brain into thinking that it's cool. So that's a trick as to while you're exercising that you can do that. Another thing that they found is through research through Stanford University is ice vests. Typically we used to use the ice vests, and I used to use them as well to try and cool down. Don't work as effectively as cooling the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, and this part of your face here and here. So anywhere that on your body that you don't have hair, there's actually special little cells, and they don't have capillaries. So what that means is that the arteries and the veins transfer over straight away. So that means that the blood flow actually goes a lot faster. So I have just a typical little ice pack here. I fill it up with some ice and some water, and all I do is just cool the palms of my hands. And that will actually cool down my body faster than if I was wearing an ice vest. So that's another little trick from that one. And Andrew Huberman does a podcast called the Huberman Lab, and he has some wonderful episodes about all the cooling mechanisms. They've actually designed a glove which has the cooling mechanisms for it. And he also has some podcasts about the heat acclimatizations. The other things that I also, if I'm out in the garden, so not exercising, but out in the garden, these are my lovely tricks that I get from Kmart, is just little wearable fans. So little wearable fans, and just sits like that. And I can be walking around doing gardening, and I've just got that cool air coming through. So I think this was like $12 or something like that from Kmart. It also has like little fancy lights. There you go, you can see. So if you want to have a little disco happening at the same time while you get cool. So I actually like that one, and it's really good when I go for a push in my wheelchair. I don't have it over there, it's fine. I also have like a little lollipop fan as well, so I can hold it there. But I really like the double one because my hands are free and I can keep moving. Other things to trick the brain: ice spray. So just getting that from Woolworths, Coles, Chemist. I actually spray that on the back of my neck, and again, that cools the blood as it goes to the brain, tricks the brain into thinking that it's cool. So while I'm doing that really intensive exercise during that, brain thinks it's cool, and then later on I've got my pre and post cooling. So lots and lots of little tricks to be able to get that cooling happening.
Yeah, and it's nice to know that you don't, as a Paralympic athlete, you don't use any, crazy expensive techniques. It's all very available to everyone. It's having a slushy. I must say you are very brave giving yourself a brain freeze. I think a lot of people would avoid that if they can, but it is really interesting that tricking your brain into being cold actually can have that real impact on the MS symptoms, which is, I find, mind-boggling. But it's any of those little tips are great, and I guess if you can cool the body down just by a little bit, it can make all the difference.
Even I call them funny faces, but Zupa Dupas, the icy pole in the plastic sleeves, just having one of them, crushing them up, and just having that as a simple thing. Sure, I do ice baths, but that's more for a recovery. So after doing a fight or something like that, my ice baths are there to bring out the bruises and recovery, as opposed to more of the cooling mechanisms. You can even get little cooling towels, like little towels everywhere that you just dunk in water, you wring it out, and then it stays cool. So all of my cooling mechanisms over time, I've bought the expensive ice vests and everything like that, and they've melted within 5 minutes, and then I'm just left with 5 kilos of slush, which just doesn't work. I've found that these little tiny things are absolutely the best ones, but definitely recommend trying those slushies, and even just cooling the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. You think about it, on a hot day, you come home, you take your shoes off, you take your socks off, and you put your feet on cold tires. You feel cold straight away. It cools you down. You don't want to have absolutely freezing, because then what happens is it vasoconstricts and it stops. You just want to be nice and cool, and it cools down straight away.
Yeah, I guess even, you go for a walk or a run or whatever it be, and just taking those shoes and socks off immediately, the feet seem to hold in so much heat. So, but I think everyone can get around having a Zupa Duper at the start or the end of a bit of exercise. I think that's a nice little bonus, and it cools you down. So perfect.
Yeah.
And And I will just get to the final question now. But thank you for all your answers so far. So do you have any tips or advice for the everyday person? Obviously, you're a Paralympic athlete, and your training is 11 times a week, which is more than most people. So do you have any advice for those trying to get over those barriers to exercise, just for the everyday person?
My advice for if they want to start exercise is to start with something that they enjoy. It's about having fun. For me, I found kicking people was fun. Then I'm extremely competitive, so I made it into essentially my job and my lifestyle. But it doesn't have to be something big. Start with a couple of minutes. It could be I'm sitting on the couch, and it could just be I'm going to move my arms or I'm going to move my legs. And then it could be the next ad break, I'm going to try to stand up and then sit back down. Or it could be, hey, I really liked dancing. Even I love dancing. I'm not good at it, but I like dancing. There's some movement in it. It could be that you like gardening. I love to garden. It's very, and you've got the activity. But it's not that you have to do heaps of it. I think a lot of people go, oh, I've got to do so much because of this. It could just be a couple of minutes, and you're starting off gradually and you're progressing through. It's the same sometimes, I think, when you want to clean the house. You look at it and go, I've got to clean the whole house in one go, rather than going, oh, well, I can just do this little bit today and then I'll do that little bit today. Or if New Year's resolutions of I'm going to eat healthy, and they chuck out everything in the fridge and the pantry and then they buy all this wonderful kale or whatever, and they overhaul everything, and it lasts a week because they've tried to do too much too soon. Just something gradual, and do it with a friend, get some support, make it social, anything at all to make it fun.
Yeah, some really good advice, and I think certainly a great piece of advice just to start small, build into it, set yourself some little goals. But I think at the end of the day, movement is key, and I think that's a really important bit of advice is, any sort of movement, whether or not it's getting up and cleaning or doing some vacuuming, or, depending on where you're at, getting out the garden. I think some people, do get caught up that it's, you have to go for a run or you have to do this. I think, any movement is key, and any movement's better than none. So, as I say, you don't have to be a Paralympic athlete to be getting the benefits of physical activity and exercise. But, and really appreciate you answering all my questions, and you've given some really great responses. And it's really interesting to sort of hear almost a day in the life of a Paralympic athlete, because, or a week in the life, training that many times and 20-something recovery sessions. It's you are very committed. So it's amazing, and I can't get my head around it. But I do have a few questions that have come in, if you don't mind answering a few, and I'll get to the first. I'll get to the first one. So Bridie's just asked if you could talk about, she says, diet and training regime. You've talked a bit about your training regime, but maybe if you could talk a little bit about your diet.
Yep. My diet varies, and the main reason why my diet varies is that one of my MS symptoms, which came up just before my preparations to Tokyo, is I lost my ability to swallow. So I was choking on my food. So I went through a period of only being able to eat soft food and thickened fluids. I'm slowly coming out of that, but for me, my fatigue is the biggest thing when it comes to my diet. I struggle to eat a steak because of the chewing sort of factor. The muscles get too fatigued and then I can't swallow them properly. And also because I've done the training throughout the day, I'm fatigued and prepared. So at the moment during the week, I have U-Foods as my prepared meals, and it's very much soft food of a variety of vegetables or either pasta or your chickens. And then breakfast, I still have breakfast, which is variety of either your porridges or cereals, or raisin toast at the moment is my favorite for breakfast in the morning. But my main meals are lunch, because that's when I'm not as fatigued. I still eat chips, I still eat chocolate, I still enjoy a lovely glass of wine or two. But for me, it's about that moderation. Weekends, because I'm not training, I make sure that my weekends are pure relaxation. It's where we may go out for dinner or something like that. But again, depending on how fatigued I am, it depends on what I can actually have to eat. I try to avoid processed food as much as possible. But like I said, I enjoy some chips or some chocolate every now and again.
Yeah, what would life be without some naughty foods like chips and chocolate? I probably dabble a little bit too much into those, but you know, that's, you know, you still have to enjoy yourself. But I think that is good advice. Moderation is key for sure. So I've got a question here. It's quite a pertinent question. Sorry, might be somewhat personal, so you don't have to answer it. But how do you find menstrual cycles, and how do they affect training and performance?
Yeah, I can answer that question. I purposely do not have a menstrual cycle. I have not had a menstrual cycle for the last 10 years. That was a personal decision that I made, and it was a decision that I made also with my GP. The reason for that is that I had a lot of complications with my menstrual cycle, and it was, for me, better to use the contraceptive pill to control my menstrual cycle and to skip that menstrual cycle. So for the last 10 years, I haven't had a menstrual cycle from that. So, but still work closely with my GP and still monitoring that, still making sure that I have pap smears regularly and checking for it.
Perfect, thank you for that. And I think maybe I'll just get to one more question. We've run out of time, and we've timed it quite well actually. So just a question here about what recovery works best for you. I know you've spoken about ice baths and you do a lot of recovery. Is there anything else you do for recovery?
Yeah, my main recovery that I do is twice a week I do myotherapy. So after each of my strength and conditioning sessions, I go and see my wonderful myotherapist, Adriana at No More Knots. And I've been working with her for the last 3 years. And we actually do what's called electrotherapy. So most people have heard of dry needling. So it's where you put needles into the muscles. What we actually do for me is we then put an electrical pulse into those needles. So what we found is, particularly in the legs, I get quite a lot of spasticity, and I cannot release those muscles any other way. But by putting the needles into particularly glutes, calf muscles, what happens is we put that electrical pulse through, and it stimulates those muscles where the nerves can no longer fire, and it actually releases those muscles and releases the spasticity in the muscles, which means that I can actually walk. Because we found before that I was using my wheelchair absolutely every single day, whereas now I'm rarely using my wheelchair. I only use it for very long distances. So after every single strength and conditioning session, twice a week, it's my myotherapy. And that's in my NDIS plan as my main recovery for my MS symptoms. So that's covered under my NDIS plan. For me, that's the absolutely best thing, is just because I don't have the nerves firing to those muscles. So by putting the electrical stimulation into those muscles means that the muscles can release and I don't have the spasticity as much.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, myotherapy, that's another great piece of advice. If, you know, for anyone that does have spasticity, that might be a really good option. So thank you. And we might finish there. So I just want to say a massive thank you, Janine. You've given really massive insight into your life and into your Paralympic career and your career prior to that. And but not only that, you've given some really great advice to anyone wanting to start exercise, or people that for people with MS that are exercising but want some tips around cooling and techniques to manage symptoms. So I think a very beneficial talk today, and yeah, a great finish to Women's Health Week. So a massive thank you, and thank you to everyone that joined today. And as I said, we will email out any resources. They may have been linked in the chat as well. But yeah, thanks to everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next time. So, and have a great Friday and weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.